Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Live Talk with Faye. Obviously, I'm not Faye. Faye is taking a day of rest, so this is the first time I've hosted her show. But we welcome you and say good morning to you. If you're in some other part of the world, then it is good evening to you, or good night in some cases. So I'm going to do this today with Faye's guest, and I'll announce that in just a moment. It's good to see everybody getting on. Faye's watching. Your mom is watching, and several others. So, um, has it ever made you really angry because you want to try something new, and all of the feedback you get are those telling you that you can't do it? Or what about those unnecessary detours you sometimes take that does nothing but waste time? Well, today we're going to talk about those things and many more. And so Faye says, and I'm surprised about this, but Faye says get a cup of cocoa or a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. I'm with you on the coffee, Faye. And get ready, because this is Dr. Bill filling in for Faye, and you're watching Live Talk with Faye. Now, just a real quick announcement. Faye, Live Talk with Faye is connected to her e-magazine called Faith Unlimited. You can find it on Facebook at facebook.com/Faith Unlimited Magazine, or you can simply go to our website at billhenshewministries.org and click on Faith Unlimited, and you can find it there. Today, Faye's guest, and actually my guest today, is Tom Tompkins Jr., who is an author, entrepreneur, public speaker, and a visionary. I love people that are visionary. They are very apostolic in their approach to things. You can find more about Tom at www.lifetimevisionary.com. Tom is the president and founder of Winlight Ministries, teaching the simplicity of the gospel. I love that. Tom is also founder and CEO of Winlight Properties, LLC, in addition to his Lifetime Visionary Ministry. Whether you own a small business, a large corporation, or a nonprofit ministry, Tom is available to implement strategies and systems that will change the course of your venture, it looks like. Tom attended Charis Bible College, the School of Ministry for Charis Bible College, and has over 23 years of profitable experience in business and ministry. Tom has owned and operated a website, a graphic design company, janitorial service, laundry service, publishing company, and has additional experience in real estate investing as well as property management. So Tom also runs his nonprofit ministry and is involved in many things. Brother Tom, welcome to the show today. Welcome to Live Talk with Faye. Would you just greet everyone before we get started this morning?
Thank you, Dr. Bill. I hope everybody's doing well this morning, and it's always a privilege to be on the show, no matter who's hosting it. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
You're welcome. So we've got a series of questions today, and we're going to be talking about some business strategies and some things that will help you. If you out there are listening today and you're in a place, and I know many of our friends, we have Faye's timeline is getting up there to being full. I have two timelines that are one is full and one is almost full. So we're dealing with 10, 15,000 people with all of our groups and pages. And so maybe you have some business questions. Maybe you have some things you want to do. You're tired of being without income and you need to do something. Well, listen, watch this show today and listen very intently. Even get a pencil and paper out and take notes so that you can find out some ways that maybe a nugget in there, a clue in there that will help you to move forward in the things that you need to move forward in. So number one, what is it that others have said that you cannot do? And she says, I heard this a couple of ways. Just do once what others say you cannot do, or the greatest pleasure in life is doing what others say you cannot do. Tom, we've all heard that. We've heard people say you can't do that. You come up with this wonderful idea, and you first thing you want to do is tell your family and closest friends, and the news is you can't do that, and they'll give you all the reasons why you can't. Ideas do come from God, and so please address this, and we'll move forward from there.
Well, one thing to think about from that standpoint is just because God has shown you something doesn't mean He's shown everybody else.
Yeah.
And you really do have to be careful. I've learned this lesson over the years, and I still sometimes have to be reminded of it to this very day. But you cannot share your vision, your dreams, your goals, any of that with just anybody, because there's a lot of people out there who. One of my favorite quotes that I came up with over the years because of this very experience is meaning well and being right do not always go hand in hand. There is no telling how many people there are, how many thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people there are across the world, not just in the United States, but across the entire globe, our round Earth. And I'm dropping that hint because I have a friend who believes the Earth is flat. Oh my goodness. Different subject for a different time. But so many people who could be millionaires, if not billionaires and beyond, but because they told the people who they're close to, who they thought would support them and encourage them and build them up, and those people did the opposite of that. They were basically dumbed down to an average life or below. And there's so many people out there who will never know about because they listened to the naysayers. Basically, somebody who gave up on their dreams talked them into being like them. And it's a challenge because you automatically assume that the people you're closest to are always going to help. And, a good story I'll give on this. I don't know how long ago this was, but it was when this person, I'm going to reveal who it is in just a minute. I know a lot of people who aren't in the United States may not know who I'm talking about, but just research it a little bit. But there was a man who, as a child, his teacher said, okay, class, I want you to write a short paper on what you want to do when you grow up. I don't know how old he was, 6, 7, 8 years old, probably something like that. And so this guy wrote down that he wanted to be on television one day and wanted to be a comedian and make people laugh and all that kind of stuff. And so he turns that paper in. He's really excited about it. And he gets the paper back and it has an F on it. He received the lowest grade possible. And so he went up and asked the teacher afterwards, why did you give me an F on this? And she looks at him and says, has anybody in your family ever been on TV before? And he said, well, no. And she said, then why do you think you're going to be on TV? And he went home and he talked to his dad about this. And his dad said, well, I can't really tell you what to do. You're going to have to make that decision on your own. But it might be a good idea to rewrite the paper and keep this one and put your dream in your nightstand. And every night before you go to bed, look at it. Every morning when you get up, look at it and just keep it before you at all times. And that person's name is Steve Harvey. I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers this morning know who that is. Yeah. And there's one person right there that's a classic example as had he listened to the naysayer, his teacher in that case, who meant well, I think, in what she did, but she was wrong in her well-meaningness. Meaning well and being right do not always go hand in hand. Right. And had he listened to her, we wouldn't know who he is today, most likely. And there's a lot of people like that. So you have to be careful who you tell because not everyone's going to support you. And if you know somebody who has a track record of discouraging you and telling you, oh, don't do that, just be practical, go get a low-paying job and just pay your bills and garbage like that. And I'm not saying there's not a place for being practical, but you need to get out of that as soon as you can because that is a detour, that is a ditch, and it will slow you down. Man, there's just so much I could say to answer that question further and further, but I don't want to take the whole show to do it. But the bottom line is this. Be very cautious of who you tell. And if you don't have anyone around you to build you up, just don't tell them what you're doing. And encourage yourself. The Bible talks about encouraging ourselves. David encouraged himself. And so that could be done. And if that's your best option, go with it. But be careful because that can be the greatest detriment to walking out your best life is listening to people who don't have the kind of vision, the kind of high thinking that some of us do, and they don't know how to encourage. It's not that they're bad people. They just don't know what to do with that. And so they do what they were taught to do growing up, for example. And it just is what it is. So you have to be cautious.
Yeah, and the Lord is already an encourager. He has given us a book filled with encouragement called the Bible. But in addition to that, we are our own best encourager. And so we're going to have to stay positive and encourage ourselves and think through things. Tom, in ministry, for example, and I'll segue this toward business in a moment. But in ministry, Faye and I love to get leaders who really are passionate for a certain part of the ministry and just give it to them and let them run with it, provided they bring all of the major decisions to us so that we keep the church calendar right and nothing overlaps. But the same in business. Sometimes it seems hard for people to make right decisions. If you're the boss, you might have employees that have good ideas, just like in a ministry. And these employees in your business, they think they'll work well. But one thing I've learned is, as a visionary, and you'll be able to identify with this, as a visionary, I have the best handle on what God wants me to do because it's the vision he's given me. Now, the best thing I can do is continuously share that vision and even share details of that vision so people will end up getting on board and having the same heart that I do about that vision. But anyway, so being the boss, how things run, what's got to be done, and there are things that employees may not know. So their idea may be good, but it may not work. And if you're the boss, sometimes you've got to say no, and this can present problems. So how do you deal with this type of an employee situation who will constantly try and push you to do what they think you should do, and what can you do to make things a little easier in that situation?
Well, it really all starts from day one. It really comes down to the heart of the leader, the supervisor, the president, the CEO, whatever their title is. That person needs to have things in place in their own heart that they can pass on to those they're leading. And if that's a problem someone is dealing with, then they first need to address why it's going on based on how they're leading. When you teach people as a leader, you can help them to overcome that way of doing things. If they do it once, it's one thing, and you start to see a pattern, then you start to kind of address that directly and build up almost like a custom mentorship or discipleship program, whichever terminology you want to do. Mm-hmm. And you can take that person and help them tremendously to change their way of thinking so that their ideas go from not so workable ideas to wonderful ideas. In fact, mm-hmm. that's one of the biggest mistakes that leaders often make, is they think that everything needs to start with them. But if you have a team of people working for you, you actually need to send questions down to those people and let them return answers to you. So you obtain the plans, the ideas, and the recommendations from those people, and it makes them feel good. You're causing your employees to feel valued. That's the number one thing that employees want, is to feel valued and appreciated. Absolutely. And it's not so much about how much they make per month or per week or per hour. It's are they feeling valued, like they bring some kind of worth to the table. But one thing I like to do is, if somebody does come up with an idea, you don't have to, if beyond a shadow of a doubt, sometimes it's very clear that it's just not going to work. But other times it's not so clear. And it's okay to go ahead and test that idea. And if it works, implement it. If it doesn't work, throw it aside. No big deal. And on top of that, one of the best ways to change the way an employee is thinking, no matter where they're coming from, is to celebrate their noble mistakes, their noble failures. When you celebrate somebody's mistakes and failures, you change the way they think and the way they receive any kind of discipline or actions or whatever. Even hearing, I don't think that's going to work. When you celebrate somebody's failure, you're making them feel like they're still worth something. You're still valued, instead of just saying that was a terrible idea, we're not going to use it. You need to quit giving ideas if you don't have any good ideas. People say that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you celebrate that person, it's going to change the way they think. It's going to change the way they process things. And it's ultimately going to change what they bring to the table. They may come and not be have ever been in a program where somebody taught them how to be a leader, but that my company can teach them how to do that. For example, if I had employees that came and they were not good leaders to begin with, I'd teach them how to be that leader. And it may not be as easy with one person as it is with another, but that's really one of the greatest things to come from. But it all starts with the heart of the leader themselves. I mean, I can give examples of my own. Years ago, I had a janitorial service, and I wasn't quite where I am now with things like that. And I look back at some of the things I did with one particular employee, and I think, wow, I wish I had done things differently and been much kinder and gentler in how I handled things. I was more of the command and control way of doing things back then. And is it possible that had I done everything the right way with this person, that they still would have been lazy and basically walked off the job? Yeah, that's right. They could have. And it's possible that would have never changed. Nothing would have changed with them, but I wouldn't look back and regret that I did it the wrong way as I do right now. So in short, that's kind of the best way I think that we can deal, in giving an answer to that question.
Right. And I didn't catch if you already did, but would you define for everybody a real good definition of how do you celebrate a failure? Because most people would say, don't celebrate failures, celebrate successes. But you got an employee that royally messes up. How do you celebrate a failure?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that. On the simplistic end of that, you could just walk into that person's office or have them come into yours or whatever, pat them on the back and say, man, I am so grateful for the effort you put into this. I know you put your best into it, even though it didn't quite work the way we wanted it to. Don't stop trying. I really appreciate you. I'm glad that you're on the team and you're adding value. Now, if you really want to take it a step further, and you can't do this every single time necessarily, but if you run into this problem occasionally, actually throw a party. Just throw a little 15, 20-minute, 1-hour party with a cake and whatever. And I mean, people might think, Tom, that's crazy. Why would you want to do something like that? Because it works. I've seen it work. And when you do this, you change what's going on up here. You change the way a person is thinking. You rewire their thinking. And I've seen it happen where you use this process, and the person who had the noble failure in trying to meet a deadline or whatever, they go back to their office, and within a day or two, the problem is fixed, and nobody had to even help them with it. They did it all themselves because of switching the way their brain was working.
Right.
And that's really it. I mean, just a quick little example of this. I had somebody about a year ago who I was really frustrated, and I said I was going to close my Facebook account, and this person wanted to talk to me to try and talk me out of doing that because they thought if I did that, I was going to lose a lot of business, which is not true. And but they were an outright jerk off in how they handled it. They were rude, they were mean, they were insensitive, they lost my trust. I don't really communicate with this person very much anymore. I love them, but I don't trust them. And that's the opposite effect. That's what happens when you're a command and control kind of person. And I remember this person, I called him a few days later and said, hey, man, I really didn't appreciate the way you handled that. I forgive you, but that was ridiculous. And they kind of tooted their own horn and said, well, I kept you from closing your Facebook account, and that was going to happen anyway. That's just the way it was. But, that didn't help me to come up higher. It really didn't help at all. And like I said, I don't even trust that person to this day anymore. If they needed my help and I could help them, I would do that. I would be happy to help them. I'm not against them. I don't hate them. I just don't like them. It's just that way. But that's what happens instead of being command and control, which is what that person is. They even told me, they said nobody else had ever told them what I told them about how harsh they were. And I said, well, yeah, it's because they don't have the guts to stand up to you. You're dealing with people who are cowering to you, which is kind of what you want. You don't realize it, but it is. And, I used to be that way myself. And guess what? It never produced any long-lasting positive results. In fact, what that person was doing is they were trying to use fear as a motivator. I don't think they intended it that way. It's all they know, so that's what they did. But the problem with using fear as a motivator is that without fail, fear always has to be reapplied. When you use love and care and compassion as a motivator, it sticks and it lasts, and you don't have to use that constant reapplication like you do with fear.
Right. It's amazing how Jesus dealt with Judas and with Peter and those who were just good. They were going to mess up. He knew it. He told them about it, but yet he still loved them. It's amazing. So now this is just one thing, but there's many things that people think others cannot do. So here's just a really short list of many things that of the things that can help you to conquer such problems. Like, for example, don't make excuses, or hard work, or work hard rather. And one of Faye's favorites is getting others to work with you and not do your job for you, but to cooperate. I think that's so wonderful. So, do you have any thoughts about this, Sam?
Well, in the leadership world, the reason you have a team of people is so that you can focus on being a leader, and they're going to do a lot of the jobs that. Let me just use this as an example. When I started in the web design business back in 1997, I was advised to never hire any help, do all the work myself. That way I would make all the money. And you know what? That's exactly how it worked. 10 years later, I was totally burned out. And about a month later, I started my janitorial service, and I said, I am not doing this alone. I will have employees. And it went much more smoothly, obviously, because I had help. And it was worth spending the extra money, and it gave me more money in the long run. And it was sustainable. When you have a team of people, it's not so that it necessarily keeps you from having to work hard. It just keeps you from having to work harder than you need to. A lot of people think that they need to be involved in everything. A great leader will say in corporate America, because that's really where I focus what I do. I'll work with ministries and churches, but last year I had a pastor tell me, we don't need what you have to offer. And I said, you know what? I think it's time to change my target market. And so that's why I've really gone to corporate America, because they're willing to pay for what I have, and they know they need it, and I get to learn from them too. It's a twofold win-win situation. But when it comes down to having people involved, the greatest leader in a corporate America situation, we'll say in a company, a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 5000 company, something like that. The president, the CEO, whoever that person is, they can look at the profit and loss statement every month and know what's working and what's not based on that alone. Now, what they're going to do with that is then they're going to know, okay, we've got a problem with our marketing program. Let's go find out why. And if they discover that everything is on par and it's working, then they're going to say, okay, there's something going on within our people that's the problem. Just a simple little kind of a tidbit of information here. Everything that's going on within the four walls of a corporation, a church, a ministry, whatever, is going to permeate through the windows, the walls, the doors, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to determine how successful that organization is. So if there's a lot of strife going on and a lot of problems and people not getting along, it's going to affect everything that goes on, not only in the four walls of that organization, but outside, everything they're trying to do. If it's a ministry and they're trying to reach partners, they're going to struggle with that. I was involved with a ministry at one point that had been around for quite a while, and they had a very low number of partners for having been in business or in ministry in operation for as long as they had, and it was because it was a pure command and control environment. And I remember making a statement many years before all of this came to light that it needed to change. I said, I've never seen so many type A personalities in one place. And it really was true. There was a lot of command and control there, and that's changed since then. And they've gone far beyond doubling their partner numbers. And so it's good, and it proves the importance there. But, when it comes to being a leader, it can be hard work. There's a lot involved, but you can make it easier on yourself by who you surround yourself with and how you use those people. That's why I say, send your questions down to those people on the problems you're having, or how are we going to do this, or how do we improve on that, and let them send the answers back. They may not be the best answers, but sometimes you have to go back and you have to think about it, or maybe even sit down with that person, whether it's in that particular meeting or one-on-one or something like that, and say, hey, can you expound on this? And the more a person can expound on the answers they give, the more ready they are to see that implemented. the more capable it is to work. Because if they just give an idea because they heard it somewhere else, but they're kind of writing the revelation of somebody else, there's not going to be a lot of depth there. The more depth there is, the more workability there is, and the easier it's going to be to either test or just say, man, I like that idea, let's put it into practice. And so it really all comes down to who you surround yourself with. And I've had a lot of people, it never fails. When I talk about the dangers of being self-employed, I'll have someone come up to me and say, well, I've been self-employed all these years. That means you're one person doing everything. That's what self-employment is. Being a business owner means you have people who are working for you and you're not doing everything yourself. But when you're self-employed, it's just you. And I always have someone come and say, well, it worked for me all these years. And I say, number one, I'll say, well, how many people did you impact along your journey here? How many leaders did you raise up? And the answer is 0, because they weren't leading anybody but themselves. And that's no good. That's no fun. It doesn't produce anything. And they don't have a clue how much further they could have gone. A person's success is completely related to who they surround themselves with. And if you don't know how to surround yourself with the right people, your success will likely be short term. I know a lot of people who have tried and failed in business, and it's because they thought, well, I have to start off by myself. And sometimes that's true, but you have to have a short term plan for how you're going to go from doing everything by yourself to hiring people to work for you.
That's right.
It very well could be a situation where you outsource, especially in this day and age.
Okay. If you can hear me today, we've lost Brother Tom for a moment. I know he'll be back. He's just give us a moment here to make an adjustment. But anyway, I hope you're enjoying the information that's being shared about business that can also relate to ministry things where many of you are involved in that watch our shows. But just keep in mind that business information is a very, very important tool for you. Amen. And sometimes people are managers, they manage people. It's better to do a good, to be a good leader. And so anyway, Tom Tompkins will be right back with us. Tom, if you can hear me at all, just refresh your screen, hit F5, which I know you're very well familiar with. But anyway, you are watching. Okay, internet signal went down. Okay. All right, I'm going to wait to see if I'm going to reset. Okay. All right, so he's having some internet problems, and we're going to have to give him a minute there. But I wanted to say, and Tom will have to go back and listen to this, but in light of what Tom was talking about, I was raised in the old school mindset of pastors do everything. And I can tell you what a real problem it is when ministers do everything. And especially when ministers think they have to do everything and they don't involve other people. And sometimes that's an insecurity measure. Well, probably most of the times. It's an old school ideology, but it's also not just nice old school ideology, but it's a problem for the pastor or for the leader or for the business person that thinks that the only way their business can run right is if they do it all. And I have met people that say, if it's going to be done right, I'm going to have to do it myself. You know, that's not true. Teach somebody, train somebody, implement a leadership program in your business or in your ministry. In the long run, it will work out good for the overall. Now you say, well, I've had leaders and I've let them go. I've let them do their thing. And it's caused problems down the road. Listen, you had problems before you had leaders. So problems seem to be consistent in being a leader. But the reality is you can lead people and teach them how to lead. Because one of the best things you can do if you have a wonderful leadership style is to impart what you know into other people so that they also can become a good leader. Amen. So it's very important that leaders develop leaders. We've had churches where we've had huge leadership staff. We've had churches where we only had a few, but we also were raised again in that mindset where we did it all. And so managers manage things, not people. Hey, that's very good. Now, Faye just said that in the chat room. Managers manage things, not people. We need to, even if you're a detailer and you micromanage things, look, do that with your business. Do that with the things. Do that with the issues, but not with the people. Don't make people feel like you're pressuring them, you're suffocating them by hoarding over them, but just realize. And Tom, welcome back. I was just telling folks, based on what you were just saying, that whether it's business or it's ministry, I've seen the leadership style where pastors. I came in 8 years ago where the old school mindset was that pastors did it all, pastors had to do it all, and I think that stems from an insecurity issue, thinking that if I let other people get involved in the church or I let other people get involved in the business, it's going to ruin my business. But you know what I found out? We had a particular church once, and we had a huge leadership of volunteers, and we even had some full-time volunteers, and we had some problems. But what I realized is we had problems before we had a huge staff. So problems seem to be consistent. God's creation's a wonderful thing. You got to love them. But man, sometimes God's creation can be difficult to deal with. So anytime you're around people, whether in a business or in a church ministry, because the opposite of the popular belief is that a church really is a business in a sense, and you've got to run it like one. And people say, well, it's not a business, it's a ministry, and it needs to be run like a ministry. Yet all the management style you're implementing to it does prove that you believe in managing a ministry like you would a business. But so that's just one of those things. Now, you mentioned earlier, you mentioned detours, and this is number 2, unnecessary detours. So, Tom, there are things that detour us when starting a business or even starting up a business. For instance, Faye noted that she started Inspired Creations Publishing and was already publishing a monthly magazine that's now more than just do it in online. It goes to the internet, but now it goes to Amazon, so it's got to be redone in a sense, a book style, and goes to Amazon for print. And then she also had this weekly talk show, and that takes away from the time that she needed to do when starting a new business. So tell us, Tom, without having to stop doing what Faye has already been doing, the magazine and Live Talk with Faye, and plus she does a lot of things to help me in the ministry. What can she do to help her deviate from or sidestep unnecessary detours?
Well, there's a few different ways to deal with that, and I know the most obvious is you got to hire some help, and if you don't have the capital to do that, then it's a little more challenging. But at the same time, you might have to just write some of that into the budget of the books, and that's I know sometimes people say, but I'm going to go up on my prices, and people already want deals and stuff like that. I charge a certain amount per hour to speak and to do the things that I do. And part of that is to weed out the people who are not serious. And I would rather have people who are really serious, not just kind of the tire kickers. And if that means not having as much business for a little while, that's okay, because I want the people who are serious, because the people who are serious are going to pass on to me to more people who are serious.
Right.
And excuse me. And so, in Faye's situation, since we just are talking about that, I'll use that as an example. It might mean increasing prices in order to be able to hire people who can work remotely, who can maybe take some of the load off of her shoulder as far as maybe reading manuscripts, finding errors, fixing typos, things like that, or whatever the case may be, and maybe even somebody who can do some bang-up graphic design work on the covers. You'd be surprised at what you can get for little to nothing on that. I mean, there's people out there who will do so many covers for $50 or something like that. And that's good, because that's also not only helpful in the way of of saving time, but it's also write-off money because they're not really employees. They're contract labor
Right.
in a way, and they're really not even that. It's just people who are vendors. And so you can if you have a good that's another thing that's so important is you got to have the right tax professional and a good lawyer if you need that for your company. And any money you spend on that is write-off money, and they can help you save money. They can help you make money, and there's just a lot of great advantages to that. If somebody, a common scenario is, well, you've got to make a living, and that is one of the biggest pitfalls of all. People who will, oh, I've got to have a job, I've got to be practical, and I understand that in some situations it's more difficult to get around that than others. Somebody who might have a family to support and stuff like that. You need to surround yourself. You need to go and talk to some people who have already done what you're trying to do and get their advice on how you can go from where you are to where you want to be as quickly as you can, and not let that job become the ultimate detour that takes you off track permanently. I've seen that happen many times, all in the name of being practical. But nobody goes from working a job they don't like to living their dreams without. You've got to put a lot of time and effort into what you're doing. And one of the biggest problems with that is that I see is people will say, well, I'll work on it on the side. Well, that means after hours. Well, the people you need to be doing business with in order to grow what you really want to do, they're probably not going to be available to answer the phone during off hours when you're working on the side. And so you have to come up with a plan that allows you to get away from that distraction, the job in this particular scenario, as quickly as possible. And one of the ways to do that is, you might have to delay the process for a little while, but save up enough money to live on for 2 or 3 years. And then you can really be more aggressive at it, whatever your salary is. Now, I know in my case where I live, I don't have a 4-year degree or anything like that. And where I live is a very strange thing anyway. Shreveport, Louisiana is a strange town. For example, the salaries around here are just, for the most part, are very pathetic. They're very low. The most money I'm probably going to make on a job is $12 an hour. And I mean, that's just a joke. That's just all there is to it. That's less than $1,600 a month in net income. And nobody can even save any money on that unless they go live with their parents or something like that. The thing is, I mean, here's a good example on how it works around here. My dad knew a guy who was a chemical engineer. That's an easy 6-figure job, and the most he could get in Shreveport, Louisiana was $40,000 a year. That's embarrassing. And so, you really got to think long term. Everything comes down to thinking long term. Are you going to have to move somewhere to get a job that allows you to save enough money to be able to eventually quit that job and live off of what you saved for 2 or 3 years, or however long it takes, hopefully less than a year, to really get things going? But you have to take other things into consideration as well. The cost of living where you might go. Is that going to be sustainable, or is the cost of living going to be so high that even if you get an $80,000 per year job, $80,000 per year job, is that going to be more like $30,000 per year where you came from? So you have to do some research. You have to think long term. You have to really plan things out. One of the best things you can do, one of the easiest ways to start really seeing success, it really comes down to who you know and people who you know giving you opportunities. And that comes down to building relationships. And when someone really knows what you're all about and what you do, they've maybe seen you, in my case, speak, they've heard you do something, there are a few key questions you can ask the right people, like, who do you know that I should know? What have you read that I should read? What seminar have you been to that you would recommend I go to? And that way you're kind of following in their footsteps and learning what they've learned, and then you can start kind of doing those things. And I've had people in the past who would say, oh, don't do that. You're being conceited if you do that. And they just don't know any better. People who say those things, they just don't know any better. That's the way you become a success. You ask the right questions, and you're not asking out of arrogance. You're asking out of confidence. And I don't know how people miss that, but they do. Yeah. But if you don't ask the question, you're not going to have the answer. And when you're around the right people who are the millionaires, the billionaires, the successful people, why not ask the right questions? I mean, it's not like you just walk up to a total stranger and do that, but when they know you and they've gotten to know you a little bit, man, that's important stuff. In fact, I don't know for sure about this. I used to think this was a famous quote, and I'm working to make it that way, but I think it's just something that's kind of like my grandmother came up with it or something like that, but I heard my mom say it a lot, so I've adopted it. The best conversationalist is a great listener. Well, in order to be the best conversationalist, you have to ask questions. And you have to ask questions to understand, not ask questions so you can listen to respond. There's a time for that. Like right now, it's okay for me to be listening to your questions, Dr. Bill, to respond. But there's other times when it would be good for me just to listen to understand. That's one of the biggest problems. If you want to know who's religious and who isn't, pay attention to who leaves these long comments on Facebook that you have to scroll way down to get to the bottom of it. Or as soon as you finish talking, they interject their opinion. And they're basically trying to throw their beliefs on you. That's not a great conversationalist. Yeah. And I've had to learn and develop in that over the years. I haven't always been the best conversationalist because I haven't always been the best listener. I would listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And you learn so much more when you listen to understand.
It is important to be a great listener, but it's also very important to be a part of the conversation in the right way with the right attitude and so on. Now, before we go on to the next question, Faye posted, and I'm sure with the comments you just made, she's probably going to be getting a hold of you and saying, okay, here's what you said and how do I make this happen? But she posted a question that says, if you give a % off, can you take that off on taxes?
Okay, and while I'm answering that question, Dr. Bill, you might want to F5. Well, you know, that's going to be, I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax man or anything like that, so I can't necessarily answer that question. I would imagine there's a way to do that, but you're going to have to really talk to a true tax professional to get that question answered. Taking a percentage off is really, this is just my opinion. Like I say, I'm not a tax professional. I'm not a CPA. I just want to make sure that's clear before I say this. But in my opinion, I would guess you probably wouldn't be able to take that off on your taxes because that's not money that is going somewhere. It's basically non-existent, and you can't really do anything with that. You don't have a paper trail to follow, basically, if you give a percentage off, because it's not like you paid so much for a product and then you sold it at a loss. Then you could actually take that off. But as far as just giving a 5% discount, I don't think that's going to work that way. But again, I'm not a tax professional. Y'all, I don't know if y'all have a CPA that you work with or something like that, but they could definitely answer that question for you better than I probably can. But that's my answer to that.
Okay, thank you. All right, question number 3. Point number 3 is holding on to past failure. Now, this is a big one. When we've made big mistakes, and we probably all have, I think you make mistakes that help you to know what you did wrong so you can move forward in the right direction. But what happens when we constantly dwell on those mistakes and they begin to take control of our mind and our thoughts and hinder us from coming up with new ideas? They can keep us from doing the work we need to do in addition to other complications. So what can you tell us that will help people avoid the detour of staying focused on past failures?
Well, if you don't like the results you had then, don't repeat them now, which means don't even think about them. You know, one of the worst cliches out there is hindsight is always 20/20. And the problem with hindsight is that it's an anchor. It keeps you stuck. If you're always looking back to what's behind you, you're not going to be able to look to what's ahead of you and walk towards it. You're going to be stuck. And basically, you'll turn into a pillar of salt. Not that that's literally going to happen, but that's kind of what happened when Lot's wife looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt. I think that's who that was. Sarah, she turned into a pillar of salt. I believe that's the name. I'm not saying that literally, okay? I'm just using that in the figurative sense, but you're going to be stuck. You might as well be a pillar of salt if you're going to focus on your past mistakes. I know a lot of people say, well, I learned a lot from my past mistakes. Well, what are you doing to apply that now so you can move forward?
Exactly.
It kind of goes back to one of our original questions and about who you talk to, because a lot of the time people around us will remind us of our past mistakes. Well, remember, you already tried something like this in the past and it didn't work.
Right.
That happens, and you've got to be very wary of who you tell these things to. I know a lot of people who could be millionaires and billionaires right now, but because of their past mistakes, they're literally stuck in one place because they don't want to try. I'm not trying that again. I've had enough. I don't have it in me to do that.
Sure.
You know, a lot of people talk about it. I've been asked, when should you give up on your dreams? And I tell people you should give up on your dreams when you're in the only place where Wi-Fi is not necessary. That's why there is no such thing as a smart coffin. So, the easiest way is just to say, you know what, that didn't work. It's time to come up with new plans, ideas, and recommendations, and go to the right people. You might have to search for them and ask them how to deal with this or how to do that and things like that. I've done that on Facebook before, and I've had people give me advice, and they mean well, but as soon as I read it, I say, I know that's not going to work. And one of the primary things I look at is, wait a minute, here's somebody. Well, here's a great example. On a YouTube video I have that came out last week, I had somebody who told me the video was too long, and it was 7 minutes or something like that. And they said it needs to be 5 minutes or less. And I immediately went to this person's YouTube page, their channel, and lo and behold, they had no videos. Okay, why would I take the advice of somebody who doesn't make any videos on what I should do with my own? So when you go and you're looking for advice, it may seem great to ask people on YouTube and your friends because they're your friends or your family or whatever. If they have not been successful at what it is you're attempting to do, how are they going to advise you on it? You know, that's like somebody coming to me and asking me for medical advice. I'm not a doctor. You don't want to hear what I have to say about that because it's not going to be much. It just is what it is. So just a simple example, or like being an engineer. I'm not an engineer. Now, I grew up with my dad, who is an engineer, and I learned a lot from him about that kind of stuff. And that's one reason why I learned how to look at things from multiple angles. That was good, but ultimately I couldn't do a whole lot for people in that respect because I'm not being an engineer myself. I know very little, just what little I learned from him over the years, which has been helpful to me and good stuff. My dad is one of the smartest people I've ever known in my life. There's still certain things I wish I could see him try because of what I believe he could do with them. It's kind of would be almost like a challenge just to see what would happen, whether it's tuning a race car or something like that. Man, there's a lot of smart people out there, but you just got to know the right ones to talk to, and you want to be guarded in who you go to about things to obtain ideas and stuff like that. Because if you aren't careful, they might give you bad advice, well-meaning but bad advice, and it's just one of those things. And even sometimes I've had people who have done well in business that still give the same advice that somebody who's never been in business would give. And a lot of the time I find out that person wasn't as involved in the business as, say, their spouse was or something like that. They just by marriage became part owner. They really don't know what they're doing and what they're talking about. And so, people that might advise a visionary, an entrepreneur, somebody who's really pursuing business, you just need to go get a job. If somebody was ever to advise that, the best thing they could do is say, what you need to do is go get a job that's going to help you to grow in what you're great at doing. Like for me, for example, I love to speak, I love to teach, I love to train people. And so if somebody advised me to do that, the only way I would even pay attention to what they say is, well, you need to find a job where you're speaking in front of people, where you're teaching them, where you're leading them, and that kind of thing. And what's even better is when they say, and here's how you do it. Here's where you might want to go. Here's my recommendation. I'll put a good word in for you, that kind of thing. And that's the kind of person you listen to. So I probably rabbit trailed a little bit there, but I hope that helps.
That's okay. That's okay. Mom posted a question. It says, I have a monogram business, so I offer service, and which you well know. Is there any way to have a website if you don't sell a product? Is there a way to have a website? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's one thing to consider when it comes down to something like that, and it still might be necessary to have a website, but there's a difference between a website and a web page. A website is multiple pages. A web page is just one page.
Any page,
And you can actually do that for very little. You could go to a website like Weebly.com. You can build a website for free. They have dozens of templates, some that are very specialized that are for businesses, and you can actually have one that maybe is perfect for monogramming if that's what it is. They may have a monogramming template, or you could always pay somebody to change those graphics out. That's what I did with my own website. I mean, I did it all myself, but I changed out the graphics to match what I'm doing within this template. So you have that for free. Okay, you pay nothing for that.
Yeah.
Then you can go to a website like GoDaddy.com that hosts websites, and you can get a domain. I did it with 2 different domains last year, I think, for $2.95. Now, after you've had it for a year, it's going to jump up to $14.95, and they're going to try and stick you with this little security thing that isn't really necessary. It takes it up to $25. I just called them and said, I don't want that, and I had to convince the tech why I didn't want it. But when I asked him not to have it on there, he didn't have a choice. So, I mean, technically, you could get into that for less than $20 a year and have a website. With Weebly, there's a lot of options. They make it so easy. This is one reason I'm glad I'm not in the web design business anymore, because that world has changed so much. They make it so easy to have. There's so many drag and drop options there where, and if you don't know what to do, you just get on YouTube and say how to do this on Weebly, and it'll pop up. It's always there. There's tutorial videos on that stuff, so anybody can do this stuff. But that's how you can do that when you're just selling a service as opposed to products. And then if you did wind up selling products at some point down the road, you can phase that into it. And there's a lot of different options on that, but that's the easiest way to get started.
And there is a segment of the population who will really focuses on websites. I love our website. We've had our website for a lot of years. So I'm grandfathered in. There's, even with the same companies, there's not the same websites, but it really does need a professional upgrade. So I've been thinking about that. And so, here's the thing: people will look at websites and they'll see your business. It's a good way you can add a PayPal link, a shopping cart. You can do all those things, and it just helps business. And so Mom asked, can you explain the difference between a web page and a website, which you just did, and says which does she need? So I think what you're going to be doing is helping Mom design a web page or a website.
Probably so, but I mean, it's simple. A website is multiple pages. A web page is just one single page that kind of just has all the information on it. And
I agree. Depends. And, there are people who are not tech savvy, how to put links and how to change out pictures. And so I do that occasionally for people, especially small ministries. But, you're right. Drag and drop, add things. It is so super easy that really, if someone would just apply themselves and take the time, anybody could design a website. You do need to know a few things that a person that's done it for a while. But anyway, let's go on to the next one, because we're getting out there. The next one, we're talking about fear of trying something new. So Faye has a new idea that she's wanting to try beginning this July, but she does not want to stop doing any of the things she's currently doing. And I think you may have touched on this earlier. And the new idea will take a lot of people to help her. They won't have to come here to work. They can work from their own home, from their own computer. One of the big fears is getting the right people to help and having time to direct those who decide they want to work for her. What advice can you give? And this will fit a lot of people that's trying to expand their business.
Well, fear is the greatest killer of any idea and any progress. A fear of change, fear of failure, fear of whatever, fear of what people will think,
Yeah.
fear of success. There are people who are fearing success, believe it or not, because um, probably more in the church world because most Christians are poverty minded. Sorry, it just is what it is, folks. Not trying to hurt anybody, but most Christians are poverty minded, and so one Christian might say, well, man, what about the persecutions I'm going to deal with? Well, the Bible says that God will give you great increase with persecutions, not because of anything he's doing, but because of the people who are going to say, man, your church is way too big. Your salary's too
Sure.
big. Stupid stuff like that. That's a high horse for me, a soapbox, because um, people who, for example, condemn Joel Osteen because he has a big church and a big salary and
Mhm.
stuff like that. They have no
Mhm.
clue about where he came from to where he is right now. But he's a much bigger thinker than they are, and
Yeah.
I think it's ridiculous that people do that. Ministers should actually
Yeah.
have a much higher salary than they do. And for people who think differently, they need to try being a minister for a while, and they'll find out.
I'm telling you.
Yeah,
I'm
you
telling you.
could say a lot about that. I know.
Yeah, 45 years of personal ministry experience, plus being raised in the ministry and watching my family, watching my dad in a business, I could add a lot to. I think that's not really what God has called me to, but yeah, you're right. It really gives you some. I used to say that before you continue criticizing what I'm doing, why don't you go pastor a church for a year and then come back and let's talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as hiring the right people goes, yes, that is a challenge. And I'm going to say something that's just really blunt, but I'd rather just not sugarcoat anything so that nobody can question this. But you basically attract who you are. And so if you don't like who you're attracting, then change who you are. Easier said than done. Yes, I know that. But and I think Faye is a wonderful lady, so I'm not putting Faye down in that respect. But I've
Right.
seen that so many times, like that ministry I mentioned earlier. Um, the person who is in the limelight with that particular ministry is not really a command and control kind of person, but their wife is. And that's why I believe they had all those problems for so many years. That person's wife was running a lot of the ministry at one point. And so she attracted a lot of command and control people, and that just created an environment. And until it was dealt with directly, it was not fixed. And you're never going to have complete perfection in all of that because you have people, and that's okay to understand that.
Right.
Nothing to fear there. It just is what it is. I'd better have the help and than try and do it all by myself, and pretty much guaranteed failure if you do that.
Right.
One thing that's good as far as Faye's question goes to do is to get a few people together and brainstorm the right questions to ask on a questionnaire for prospective hires, we'll say. I know they're not going to really be employees, whether they're subcontractors or whatever they are, whatever their title is.
Right.
If you ask the right questions, and this is nothing new, it's been being done for a long time. A lot of companies do this in
Yeah.
corporate America. They will ask questions and they'll rephrase that question a few different ways and see if they get a different answer. Because even though you don't realize what you're doing, when you answer the same question that's been reworded a different way, it's
Hmm.
because of what's going on up here and in the heart. And that's what corporate America has known for a very long time. A lot of the time, we don't ever apply that in other areas of life, but I think we
Right.
should. And it's just that simple. And, you know, this is probably easier said than done. I can spend a few minutes with a person and just listen to what they say and ask the right questions of that person. And I'll know whether or not I want to hire them or not. For example, that question might be, are you in debt? And not how much, but are you in debt? And how many years have you been in debt? And what did you think of your last job? Tell me about your last boss. Tell me about your current relationship as far as romance goes, or the best one you've had up until this point, if depending on where you are. Questions like that are really good because it reveals what is deep down inside of a person. And
Hmm.
when you can get to that stuff, it's going to help you to weed out the people who, to basically vet people, and you weed out the ones you want and or the ones you don't want, and hold on to the ones that you do. And one thing to consider in this position, whether it's Faye or anybody else, you also want to really pay attention to that person and listen to what they say, because they're going to tell you, they may not say it word for word, but they're going to tell you how teachable they are and how trainable they are. And you might have somebody who maybe doesn't fit the mold of what you're looking for, but they have the potential of becoming a great leader, and you can train them into being such, and you can hire that person. And so that's one thing about it. That's I kind of touched on it earlier. That's one of the worst pitfalls of being self-employed and doing everything by yourself. You're the chief cook, you're the bottle washer, you're everything. If you don't do it, it isn't going to be done. And that's that you have nobody to lead and nobody to train and no lives to improve. That's one thing I love about being in leadership. You have the chance to impact lives in a positive way. Hopefully that's the way it's being done. I know it's not always that way. There's such things as toxic jobs out there, and we would definitely want to stay away from those. And even some of those are within the four walls of the church. I've seen that.
Absolutely.
I had an experience in a church years ago where I was politely kicked out, and that church was pure command and control. There was a couple of ladies who were running that church, and even though there was a pastor there, I called those ladies the crypt keepers, and because they were so old. And it was really an interesting experience to watch. And ultimately, when I stepped aside, I saw how bad it really was from an outsider standpoint. When I left that church, it was much worse than I thought. In fact, I had the chance to pastor that church. They offered it to me, and I said no thanks. And the next guy that did it, he took it, and he's still struggling to this day because of that. And he's probably not even aware of that, I don't think. But it really changed his life in a very negative way. But that's what that environment does. So. Yeah, but create an environment where people can learn and thrive, and they love to come to it, and they don't have bad days. You might have challenging days, but you don't have bad days. And so that's one of the greatest things of being in leadership is you can do more for other people than they might get elsewhere.
Okay. Faye asked for our international people, how can they, and I think she meant scam, U.S. people to be sure they are good and real? How can they scan?
Well, the best thing you can do in a case like that is get references and talk to those people. Whether it'd probably have to be through email or maybe even through a internet conference call like this, a video call, I guess. Always ask for references and call every single one of those references. The fewer references a person has, the more suspicious I would be. That's just me. Someone else might say I don't see it that way, and they may be right. I don't know. But in my opinion, the fewer references a person has, the less likely they are to be somebody you're going to want to hire. And one thing to consider, let's just say you came up on a list, somebody sent you a list of 10 references. Call the first two and the last two. And here's why I say that. The first two are the ones who they think are going to give them the best reference. The last two are the least. That's why I say that. So I think that's a real simple way and practical way for those outside of the United States, if they wanted to hire somebody in the U.S. or from the U.S. to basically find out whether they're someone you really want to pursue or not.
Right. Okay. We're moving toward the end of the show today. Here's number 5, doing more of what has proven to not work. Now, you touched on this earlier, but Faye says some people get caught in a rut. And as Faye's father-in-law used to say, a rut is nothing more than a grave with both ends kicked out. So many people go around and around and never try anything new. They never try to do something different, and they never see themselves successful. And so what can you add to this today, Tom?
Well, I've seen that, and I've done it in the past. People think, well, things aren't working, so I'll just do more of what I've already been doing, thinking that's going to fix the problem. If a little bit of it's not working, a whole lot of it's not going to work. It's really a bottom. This is why you test ideas. When you receive those plans, ideas, and recommendations from your team, for example, if it's something that hadn't been tried before, if it's innovative, if it's something you don't know about, test it and find out if it works. Don't be afraid. That way, if it proves to work, then you're in good shape. Now, how do you do that? Well, you might have to do something within your company, within your organization, and maybe let people try it out. Or you might get a small group of people, maybe current clients, and say, hey, listen, this is something we're thinking about doing. What do you think? And now, don't do that with just one person and have them say it's a great idea and then go with it. Don't do that, because it might be a great idea and you might want to go with it. Or it might be that that person just doesn't have enough experience to say any different, and they don't recognize a bad idea when they see it.
Right.
So I would say that's a couple of really simple ways, because I know that's a question that would come up, and an obvious question, but that's basically my answer to that question.
Right. Okay. Anything else you might want to share with us on this subject of what we talked about today, Tom?
Other than just don't give up. If you have something that you want to do, and it's something that you, no matter what you do, you can't stop desiring to do that thing. You just can't get rid of it. You might say, man, I'm sick and tired of trying this, but then a few days later, it's still within you. The desire is still there. That's what you want to keep pursuing. And the best thing you can do is find somebody who can give you great advice on how to get over the hump, and take that person to lunch. And the first thing you do when you sit down and the food arrives is ask the waiter or the waitress for a take-home box, because you're going to keep that person talking so much they're not going to be able to eat. Pay for their meal, all that kind of stuff. Let them do all the talking. The only talking you do is you ask the questions. You're a great conversationalist. You're asking questions, but you're listening to the answers, taking notes. And real quick, a side note to that, if you do something like this, make sure that you come up with your questions ahead of time. The worst thing that I've ever had happen is somebody fumbling through trying to figure out what they should ask me at an appointment like that. I've had that happen. And you'll come up with different questions along the way as you listen to that person answer. But always write down the questions you want to ask first, even if it's just 2 or 3 or just one, because it's probably going to lead to more as you listen to that person. And so, but the bottom line, don't give up, don't quit. Surround yourself with the right people. Be careful of who you share your dreams with, and be careful of the atmospheres you go into. There are toxic atmospheres. I just feel like I need to say this. I'm going to say it. If you're going to a church where they're telling you that your problems come from God, that God allows or causes your problems, and he's trying to teach you and make you a better person out of that, you need to find a different church, because you're in a toxic environment. And even if the pastor's a great person, man or woman, if they mean well, but meaning well and being right do not always go hand in hand. So the environment you're in is very important as well. And I know sometimes people are in environments where they can't necessarily get out of it. I can hear somebody asking the question, well, what if the bad environment is my spouse? Check your heart at the door and see how you're responding to that person. Why don't you one day walk up to that person if they're always critical of you and mean and everything? And I know that does happen. It just is what it is. People are like that. People are wounded. And so they live out of those wounds. Why don't you tell that person how grateful you are for them, and that it's you consider them to be a special treasure? And you might have to convince yourself of that. You may not feel that way. You need to stop and think about that, because that's really what they are to you. And when you drop that kind of stuff on a person and don't really give them what they necessarily deserve, it's going to change the way their heart works, the way their brain works, and what goes on inside of them, and what they ultimately spit out, so to speak, for lack of better terminology. So, that's what I had to say.
Okay. Tom, apparently you have a show coming up next Sunday, February 18th, 2018, and is that 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? It's
6 p.m. Eastern, or Central, actually. And that is the questions to ask yourself before giving up. It's going to be a webinar kind of like this. I'm not going to have a guest or anything on there, but I'm going to just be doing it live right here in my office. And that's next Sunday night, the 18th, I believe.
Yeah, and that is 6 p.m. Central Standard Time.
That's right.
Okay. All right. I posted it in the chat room, and so it will be on our site. Let's Let me just say that you mentioned questions to ask yourself before giving up. You mentioned that you're going to discuss how to steer clear of giving up and living the rest of your life in a place of I had, or had I, or what if, or wish I had, or I wish I hadn't. Would you like to just give a plug and invite people, maybe give them a little hint that will inspire them to watch your upcoming program? And Faye says she's already signed up for it, and I just found out about it.
Yeah. We've all been tempted to give up because of the stresses and the strains and the frustrations. I know I'm not the only one who's been through doing everything I know to do and things still don't work, and it gets very aggravating, and you do want to quit and give up. And I'm going to present some simple questions you should ask yourself in a situation like that will help you to really think out, is this the best thing? It will literally show you whether giving up on that idea is what you should do, or if not. And you don't need anybody else to help you with this. This is something you can do all by yourself, because nobody knows your heart like you do. And your answers to those questions, when you sit and think about them, even if you can't come up with the answer instantly, you'll eventually come up with it in a few minutes, hours, days, whatever. That's what it is. I want to help the people who watch to realize, number one, when you go and pursue a new venture, or maybe something you've been pursuing for a while, you're going to hit some snags, red tape, roadblocks, whatever.
Right.
And it's the people who persevere through that who you hear about, not the ones who don't. And there's a lot of people who have attempted great things, and for whatever reason, they didn't do it. And then one day they were walking through the store and they saw it on the shelf, the product that they had the idea for, and or the service being offered, whatever the case may be, or improving on a current service that somebody has. That's what we did with my janitorial service. We used to go and offer what were called backup bids. And I got a lot of business out of that. We were just basically saying, hey, we know you currently have somebody who's cleaning this place, but in case something happens, they go out of business, they quit, you want to make a change, our bid will be on file, and you just pull it out, what we charge and how to get in touch with us, and we can start as soon as you're ready, that kind of thing. So this is basically going to help people who maybe gave up a long time ago, or are thinking about giving up, or will face the temptation to give up, to be prepared ahead of time, or to get back on track. Because it doesn't matter if you started digging a hole, most likely that hole has not been filled in. So it's not like you're going to have to go and start from scratch again. There are situations where that can be the case, but more often than not, you just pick up where you left off and just keep playing away. And if you don't quit, you're going to win. Right.
Absolutely. So you heard it from Tom Tompkins. Go to his website. I've got so many things pulled up here. Let me get back to it. lifetimevisionary.com, and you can find out more information about Tom. Faye wanted me to announce that next week on Live Talk with Faye, February the 19th, Pastor Dr. Jimmy Lewis will be her guest. And then the following week, on February the 26th, Simon Yap, an attorney from Malaysia, will be on her show. He's been on my show several times. And both weeks, they're going to be talking about the tabernacle. So there's some really great New Covenant perspectives on the tabernacle that are going to be shared. So, Tom, thank you so much for being on the show today on behalf of Faye.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
And stay right there. We'll chat a moment after the show. God bless you all. This is DrBill hosting Live Talk with Faye for her, saying, Father God loves you. And remember, when you meet up with someone this week, help bring a little sunshine into their life. And she says that is S-O-N, shine, sunshine. God bless you and have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.